Welcome to this explainer. Let's set the scene, all right? It's April 1923. Picture the Continental Hotel in Cairo. There's a wealthy British lord, and he's thrashing in his bed, burning up with a massive fever, literally gasping for breath. At exactly 1:55 a.m., he dies. But here is where the whole thing gets super creepy. At that exact precise minute, the entire power grid across Cairo completely fails. The whole city just goes black. And if that isn't enough, thousands of miles away back in England, this lord's beloved pet dog suddenly starts howling uncontrollably and just drops dead. Why? Well, just a few months before this, the man had cracked open a 3,000-year-old sealed tomb. And supposedly, right outside that tomb was a pretty clear warning. I mean, newspapers at the time went wild, reporting that a clay tablet was sitting right at the entrance, and it had this terrifying inscription: "Death shall come on swift wings to whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh." That one single warning, it sparked an absolute global panic. It created a media hysteria like the 1920s had literally never seen before. Okay, so let's really dive into this, because the numbers are what actually fueled the nightmare here. Over the next 6 years, 22 different people who were connected either directly or indirectly to the opening of this tomb, well, they ended up dying. And not just dying, but dying under these incredibly bizarre, unexplainable circumstances. We're talking about the radiologist who x-rayed the mummy just suddenly dropping dead, a secretary dying of blood clots, which then prompted his grieving 78-year-old father to jump from a 7th-floor window in London. The whole world was watching in absolute horror, and they gave this phenomenon a name: the Curse of the Pharaoh. Let's go back a bit to part 1, finding Tutankhamun's tomb. You've got Howard Carter. Now, he was an archaeologist, but he was actually the sickly son of an animal painter and really only inherited a paintbrush from his dad. His work was entirely funded by a wealthy sponsor, the English aristocrat Lord Carnarvon. And Carnarvon had shelled out £50,000 over 15 grueling years digging in the Egyptian sand. And he had absolutely zero results to show for it. Nothing. Carter was literally on his very last chance. Carnarvon explicitly told him, "Hey, this is our final season of funding." But then, on the morning of November 4th, 1922, this strange, heavy silence fell over the dig site. The workers had finally uncovered a stairway carved right into the rock. And by November 26th, they had cleared the stairs and were standing right in front of a sealed door that bore the royal mark of the afterlife. Carter chips this tiny little hole into this sealed door. Hot air from literally 3,000 years ago rushes out, making his candle flicker. And as his eyes slowly adjust to the pitch black, Lord Carnarvon asks from right behind him, "Can you see anything?" Carter famously replies, "Wonderful, wonderful things." And wow, he wasn't kidding. Inside, they found 5,398 perfectly preserved objects. We're talking a 10-kilo solid gold death mask, a solid gold coffin, and even a dagger that was forged from a meteorite. It was just absolutely breathtaking. But, this massive triumph was almost instantly overshadowed by some pretty strange omens. Carter had this pet golden canary, and shortly after the big discovery, a royal Egyptian cobra, which, by the way, is the ultimate symbol of the pharaoh's power, slithers into the bird's cage and eats it. Of course, the locals immediately saw this as the dead king's revenge. And then came the fatal chain of events for Lord Carnarvon himself. On March 6th, he gets bitten by a mosquito on his cheek. The next day, he's shaving and he accidentally slices the bite open. An infected Egyptian fly lands on the wound. Carnarvon completely ignores his doctor's orders, decides to drink wine instead of getting rest, and by April 5th, that infection claimed his life. Now, this is exactly when the global media completely lost its mind. What made Carnarvon's death so absolutely terrifying to the general public was that just 12 days prior, Marie Corelli, a very famous novelist, had published a public warning in the Daily Express. She claimed she had this rare book that predicted horrible punishments for anyone who entered a sealed tomb. And to make matters worse, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, the brilliant guy who created Sherlock Holmes, he publicly goes on record saying he believed an evil elemental spirit caused Carnarvon's illness. So newspapers are printing massive headlines like "The Curse of King Tut," and the frenzy was just completely unstoppable. Which brings us to part 2. Who was the Boy King? Let's peel back this 3,000-year-old myth for a second to look at the surprisingly tragic historical reality of who the Boy King actually was. Tutankhamun was born into severe political and religious chaos, but physically, he was the victim of extreme royal inbreeding. Actually, his parents were brother and sister. Modern science and x-rays have shown us that he suffered from a really severe clubfoot deformity, a super painful bone condition called Kohler's disease, and DNA tests even reveal that he suffered from malaria. So he wasn't exactly this towering, magical sorcerer striking down his enemies from beyond the grave. He was actually a deeply sickly teenager who died around the age of 18 or 19. So the crucial point here is captured perfectly by this one number, 130. That's the number of different walking sticks archaeologists found buried alongside him in his tomb. This supposedly all-powerful cursing pharaoh was in so much physical pain and suffered from such severe deformities that he literally couldn't take a single step without the aid of a cane. In fact, he was considered so unimportant to the rulers who came after him that they just wiped his name from their records, which, ironically, is the only reason grave robbers never found his tomb in the first place. All right, let's move into part 3, Science Debunks the Myth. Now that we've established the frail reality of the boy king, let's systematically tear down this 1920s media myth using hard forensic data, logic, and actual historical facts. And we're going to start with the biggest lie of the whole bunch, the famous curse inscription itself. So the media claimed there was this ancient clay tablet warning of the swift wings of death. But reality? It literally never existed. Decades later, the tomb's security chief confessed that an amateur reporter came snooping around asking about curses. The archaeological team just kind of smiled and didn't say anything. And from that single silent smile, this reporter completely fabricated the entire clay tablet story just to sell newspapers. It was 100% fake. Okay, but what about the people who actually did get sick, right? Well, in 1963, Dr. Ezzeddin Taha at Cairo University examined museum employees and archaeologists, and he found the real culprit. Guys, it wasn't magic, it was biology. It was a fungus called Aspergillus niger. This stuff is capable of surviving for thousands of years in dark, sealed tombs, and it causes severe respiratory inflammation when you breathe it in. But here's the real kicker. Dr. Taha noted it was completely curable with basic modern antibiotics. And let's look at those spooky omens that convinced the whole world the curse was real. Remember how the media claimed Lord Carnarvon's dog, Susie, died in England at the exact same moment he died in Egypt? Well, if you just do the basic math and look at time zones, the entire illusion shatters. Carnarvon died at 1:55 a.m. Cairo time, which actually was midnight in the UK. Susie the dog died at 4 a.m. UK time. So they didn't die at the exact same moment. They died 4 hours apart. Oh, and what about that absolutely terrifying citywide power outage at the exact minute of his death? Well, if you look at the historical records, they show that the power grid in 1920s Cairo was just incredibly unreliable. Rolling blackouts and sudden infrastructure failures were just a highly coincidental but honestly very common part of daily life in the city back then. Check this out. A 2002 study in the British Medical Journal looked at 44 Westerners who were present during the discovery, and they compared the ones who actually went inside the tomb with the ones who didn't. Guess what? There was zero difference in their lifespans. In fact, investigator James Randi ran the numbers and calculated that the average lifespan of the individuals supposedly marked by this ancient curse was a very healthy 73 years, which, ironically, was actually slightly higher than the average life expectancy for their social class at the time. Look, if this curse were actually real, these 3 specific people should have absolutely been its very first targets. But notice how long they lived. Lady Evelyn, who was Carnarvon's daughter and one of the very first people inside the tomb, she lived to be 78. Dr. Douglas Derry, the guy who literally unwrapped and autopsied the mummy, lived to the ripe old age of 87. And Howard Carter himself, the prime target, the guy who breached the tomb in the first place, he lived for 16 more years, finally dying at 64 of completely natural causes. Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, The True Immortality. I want us to really reflect on the profound philosophical irony of this entire media circus. Think about it. The frantic newspaper headlines, the fabricated clay tablets, the terrified global public. They all completely miss the true magic of what actually happened in the Valley of the Kings. For over a decade after the discovery, these desperate reporters would just constantly harass Howard Carter, asking him over and over if he was afraid of the curse, literally just waiting for him to drop dead. And Carter's notoriously dry, brilliant retort to them was always simply, "I am still alive." And this brings us to a really beautiful ancient Egyptian belief. They believed that a person experiences their true final death only when the very last person on Earth stops saying their name. Remember, Tutankhamun's successors tried to erase him from history. For 3,000 years, the entire world forgot he even existed. But because of a sickly painter's son and a wildly sensationalized media myth, King Tut is now, without a doubt, the most famous pharaoh in human history. The curse didn't kill anyone, but it did give a frail 18-year-old boy the ultimate immortality. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. Do you only truly die when people stop saying your name?